Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something really fundamental, how we live and feel.
hmm
It's the connection between our diet and, well, our mental and physical well-being. We're going to look at some fascinating research.
Yeah, including a study that really gets into how sugar intake might connect to depression.
Exactly. And we'll also zoom out a bit, look at the broader picture, healthy eating benefits, what happens with malnutrition long-term, and why just drinking enough water is so incredibly important.
We've got a great set of sources lined up for you. There's that scientific study on sugar and depression from PubMed Central,
Right.
then a medical news today piece giving us that wider view on healthy eating overall,
Okay.
plus a really compelling article from CELO on the long-term effects of malnutrition.
And finally,
And finally, a big review, also from PubMed Central, that breaks down the science behind water, hydration, and health. It covers a lot.
okay, so our mission today is basically to sift through all this, pull out the key insights, maybe some surprising stuff too. We want to help you really connect the dots, diet, mind, body, without it feeling, overwhelming or like a textbook.
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start with that sugar and depression study. Sounds pretty specific.
It is. So this one's from PubMed Central, like I said. It used a ton of data from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, NAES.
Oh yeah, NAAs, I know that one. Big survey.
Huge. This was from 2011 to 2018, looking at over 18,000 U.S. adults, ages 20 and up.
18,000. Okay, that's a solid number. So how do they measure depression?
They used a standard tool, the Patient Health Questionnaire, the PHQ-9. It's, well, 9 items assessing depressive symptoms. Pretty common.
Right. And the big question, what happened when they compared sugar intake with those PHQ-9 scores?
This is where it gets interesting. They controlled for a lot of other things first.
Like what sort of things?
Oh, age, sex, race, ethnicity, income, education level, marital status, existing conditions like high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease.
Okay, the usual suspects.
Exactly. Plus lifestyle stuff, drinking, smoking, physical activity, and even total calories eaten.
So after all that accounting,
After adjusting for all of that, they found a clear link. For every extra 100 grams of sugar someone consumed per day,
yeah,
their odds of having depression were 28% higher.
wow, 28%. Just from 100 grams of sugar, which is, what, like a couple of sodas?
Roughly, yeah. It adds up fast. And remember, that's after factoring out all those other potential influences.
That really feels significant.
It does. The study concludes there's a positive association, dietary sugar intake linked to depression in U.S. adults. They also briefly touched on why this might be happening biologically.
Okay, what are the theories?
Well, they mentioned connections seen in other research between things like insulin resistance, how your body handles sugar and inflammation,
Mm-hmm.
and also dysfunction in the HPA axis, which is basically your body's stress response system. These things have been linked to depression-like symptoms before.
Didn't they also mention something about prediabetes?
They did, yeah. They referenced a Dutch study that found people developing prediabetes were more likely to experience major depression later on.
So it suggests maybe a metabolic pathway, how we process sugar affecting our brain chemistry somehow.
That seems to be the implication, yeah, a deeper connection there.
But it's important to stress this study shows a correlation, a link, right? Not necessarily that sugar causes depression directly.
Absolutely. Key point, correlation, not causation. It shows a strong relationship, a signal that warrants a closer look. The researchers themselves say more work is needed to figure out the exact mechanisms.
And importantly, whether cutting back on sugar could actually help manage depression.
Exactly. That's the next step.
Okay, so sugar and depression, a really intriguing link, but definitely more to uncover there. Let's shift gears a bit now and look at the bigger picture of healthy eating. The Medical News Today article gives us that broader perspective.
Right. It moves beyond just one nutrient and looks at the whole dietary pattern. And it lists a ton of benefits.
Like what? What are the big ones?
Well, heart health is huge, obviously. Heart disease is still the leading cause of death in the U.S., so.
Yeah, critical.
And diet is just massive for managing blood pressure, cholesterol, all that stuff.
Did they mention specific diets? I think you mentioned DAH earlier.
Yeah, the DAH dietary approaches to stop hypertension. It's heavy on the good stuff. Fruits, veggies, whole grains, lean protein, low-fat dairy,
And limiting.
limiting saturated and trans fats, added sugars, and sodium. Pretty standard advice, but effective. They also really stressed fiber for cholesterol and cutting trans fats to lower that LDL, the bad cholesterol.
Makes sense. Okay, so heart health is number one. What else?
Reduced cancer risk is another major area.
Yeah.
The article mentions the American Institute for Cancer Research recommendations, basically eating a wide variety of plant-based foods. They didn't list specific foods to avoid, which fits our goal of not getting too bogged down in lists.
Good. And it loops back to our first topic too, right? Mood.
It does. It explicitly states that a healthy diet can boost your mood. It connects directly back to that mental well-being piece.
So food affecting how we feel, it's not just the sugar thing.
It seems not, it's broader. But crucially, the article also makes sure to say, if you are feeling depressed, please seek professional help. Diet is a factor, not a cure-all.
Absolutely essential point. Okay, what about gut health? Everyone's talking about the microbiome these days.
Yep, it covered that too. The bacteria in our gut are vital for metabolism, digestion, everything. A high-fiber diet, again, fruits, veggies, legumes, whole grains, feeds the good bacteria. Prebiotics, basically.
And probiotics.
Right, those are the good bacteria themselves, found in fermented foods like yogurt, kimchi, sauerkraut, miso, stuff like that. Prebiotics might even help with things like IBS, potentially.
Interesting. Keep the gut happy. What else? Memory.
Improved memory, yeah. It pointed to a recent review linking micronutrients, think B vitamins, iron, polyphenols found in plants to maintaining cognitive health as we age.
Okay. And weight management. Seems obvious, but...
Mentioned it, yeah. Healthy diet helps maintain a healthy weight, often without needing strict calorie counting, according to the U.S. Dietary Guidelines.
And for people managing diabetes.
Crucial. Helps manage blood sugar, blood pressure, cholesterol. Limiting added sugar, salt, unhealthy fats is key there.
Anything else jump out?
Strong bones and teeth need calcium and magnesium found in dairy, leafy greens, nuts, seeds, and even better sleep. Mostly by cutting back on things like alcohol and caffeine that mess with sleep.
That's quite a list. Really shows how diet underpins so much of our health. Didn't they give any quick tips?
Yeah, simple swaps. Water instead of sugary drinks, whole grains over refined grains, more fruits and veggies, less red and processed meat. Small changes, big impact potentially.
Okay, good practical advice. So we've got the sugar connection, the broad benefits. Now let's look at the flip side. Malnutrition. The CELO article goes into the long-term consequences.
Right, this piece is really important because it highlights what happens when nutrition is inadequate, especially early on. Malnutrition, not enough food or not the right quality, basically puts the body into energy conservation mode.
And that involves hormones.
Yeah, it triggers hormonal changes, including boosting cortisol, that stress hormone we mentioned earlier in the context of depression.
The article called it a vicious cycle, didn't it? What does that mean?
It means inadequate intake leads to weight loss, poor growth, lower immunity, which makes you more susceptible to disease. Then, disease can damage the gut, reduce appetite, impair nutrient absorption, making the malnutrition worse. It just spirals.
And those high cortisol levels from the start, they link to problems later in life.
That's the connection they draw, yeah. Early malnutrition and stress potentially contributing to chronic diseases down the road. It's quite sobering how early experiences can shape long-term health.
The article also mentioned the global impact, especially on kids.
It's stark. Malnutrition is a massive contributor to child mortality worldwide, and stunting kids not growing properly is incredibly common. It's tied not just to food, but poverty, sanitation, the whole environment.
What causes that stunting specifically?
Lots of factors. Mom not getting enough nutrition during pregnancy, poor nutrition in the womb, lack of early breastfeeding, inadequate complementary foods later, and nutrient absorption problems caused by infections.
Infections playing a role again.
Yeah, and the article used data from a center in São Paulo, Siren, to show the reality. Over 70% of the malnourished kids they treated were actually born underweight.
Wow.
And they had high rates of childhood diseases, and anemia was really common, like 62%.
Just paints a picture of multiple challenges hitting at once.
Yeah.
And the long-term effects if that stunting isn't reversed.
They're significant. The article explains that adults who were stunted as kids tend to store more body fat, especially around the waist.
Okay.
Their metabolism is different. They burn fat less efficiently, gain weight more easily, even with lower energy intake. This increases risks for diabetes and cardiovascular disease.
And insulin.
Reduced insulin production, but increased sensitivity, which sounds counterintuitive, but it can potentially lead to pancreatic exhaustion and diabetes later. Plus, higher diastolic blood pressure, raising the risk for hypertension and heart problems.
So even something like a common childhood infection can seriously compromise growth in a malnourished child.
Exactly. Their systems are just so vulnerable, but there is hope. The article also talks about nutritional recovery.
Ah, good.
Kids who get proper treatment can catch up in height, their body composition can normalize, and it seems to reduce their long-term risk for those chronic diseases. Intervention works.
That's really good to hear. Okay, so powerful lessons there about the impact of early nutrition. Let's move to our final piece. Hydration. It seems simple, just drink water, but the review suggests it's more complex.
It really does. This PubMed Central review starts by saying, look, we all know water is essential, but we're still figuring out precisely how hydration status affects overall health and chronic disease risk over time.
Interesting. Our bodies are pretty good at managing fluids, though, right? Thirst and kidneys.
Amazingly good. The review details those regulatory mechanisms. Thirst kicks in, kidneys adjust urine output to maintain balance.
What about cognitive function? That idea that being even mildly dehydrated makes you fuzzy-headed.
They looked at that, and yes, mild dehydration can impact concentration, alertness, short-term memory across different ages. But the results aren't totally consistent across all studies. And heat stress might be tangled up in those effects too. So it's not quite a slam dunk, but the general idea holds. Being well hydrated supports brain function.
Okay, and the constipation link. Does drinking more water always help?
Only, it seems, if you're actually dehydrated to begin with. If you're already drinking enough, downing extra water probably won't do much for constipation.
Right.
Although they do note that low fluid intake is a predictor of constipation, especially in older adults.
Makes sense. And kidneys obviously need water for filtering waste.
Absolutely. The review explains that's their job: filter waste, excrete it in urine. How much urine you produce varies a lot based on hydration and how much waste needs flushing out.
And it affects heart rate and blood pressure, too.
Yep, quite directly. Drinking water can acutely lower heart rate and slightly increase blood pressure. Apparently, this is useful for preventing fainting in blood donors.
Huh. Never thought about that. Okay, what about preventing long-term diseases? Where's the evidence strongest?
Strongest for preventing kidney stones. Makes intuitive sense. Flushing the system.
Okay, and less strong evidence.
Less strong, but still suggestive for constipation, exercise-induced asthma, a type of dehydration in babies called hypertonic dehydration, and maybe hyperglycemia in diabetic ketoacidosis.
Weaker evidence.
Weaker evidence for things like UTIs, hypertension, fatal heart disease, blood clots, stroke. Needs more research there. And for bladder and colon cancer, the evidence was called inconsistent.
So hydration is vital, clearly, but pinpointing specific disease prevention links is still ongoing work.
Exactly. And part of the problem, the review notes, is that it's actually hard to measure hydration status accurately across large populations. We lack easy biomarkers.
That's a challenge for research. Did they mention sugary drinks again?
They did. Pointed at the trend in the U.S. of getting more fluids from caloric beverages. And they cited research showing that swapping those for plain water is a good strategy for cutting overall calorie intake.
Brings us full circle back to sugar.
It really does.
Yeah.
They also briefly touched on calculating water needs based on energy needs milliliters per kilocalorie.
Why link it to energy?
Because energy needs already factor in body size, activity level, stuff that also influences water needs. It's a logical link used often in clinical settings.
And the current general recommendations for water intake, are they good enough?
Well, the review points out they're mostly based on median intakes from surveys. They don't fully capture individual variation, especially with different activity levels,
Yeah.
which suggests maybe a lot of us have a fluid gap.
Meaning we might not be drinking quite enough for our own specific needs.
Potentially, yeah. Something to think about.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, it's been quite a journey. We started with that potential link between high sugar intake and depression risk.
Right, a specific but powerful connection being explored.
Then we broadened out to the huge range of benefits from just a balanced, healthy diet, heart, mood, gut, memory,
The whole system, really.
the serious, long-lasting consequences of malnutrition, especially starting early in life.
A crucial reminder of how foundational nutrition is.
And finally, the vital role of hydration. Maybe more complex than we think, but absolutely essential for physical and cognitive well-being.
It all weaves together, doesn't it? What we eat, what we drink, it impacts everything, short-term and long-term, mind and body.
It really does. So the final thought for you listening today is this. Considering everything we've discussed, the sugar findings, the power of a balanced diet, the importance of hydration, what's one small informed change you could perhaps make in your daily habits?
Yeah, maybe swapping one drink, adding one more vegetable.
Something small that might yield surprising benefits for how you feel, both mentally and physically. It's definitely something worth reflecting on based on what the research is telling us.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.